the joint special meeting of the Southern Shores Town Council and the Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department Incorporated Board of Directors for February 20th, 2018 is now in session. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The recent school shooting in Parkland, Florida is a harsh reminder of the world in which we now live. Please keep the victims and their families in your thoughts and prayers during our moment of silence. Thank you. Bob Woodard had asked if he could join us today, have a few words with council. He called me on Sunday afternoon and told me he'd been unable to attend our meeting this morning. I know he wished to thank us for our recent resolution opposing offshore oil exploration and drilling. So he tells me to come back later and do that. This time I open the floor for public comment. Thank you, Sheila. This time I'll call the portion of the meeting to order where we address the fire department's discussion with us this morning. I'd like to start by saying that you'll note the first order of business is to discuss the renewal of our fire service contract with the Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department, which expires in 2019. The primary objective of this part of the meeting, the first part, is to establish a small working group whose task will be to draft a proposed contract between the town and the Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department. That'd be my goal. You should also note the second segment of the presentation will include an update of the design process of the proposed new fire station. At this time, I'll introduce Mr. Malin White. Malin is a resident of Southern Shores. He's the treasurer of the Southern Shores Volunteer Fire Department and director of the North Carolina Aquarium in Manio. Malin? Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Basically, what I want to do is assure you that you're getting a good value for the service we provide and what the county invests in us, and explore ways that we can continue that. To help me, I have Pat Regan here. He's a resident of Southern Shore. He's also on the board of Fire Services Real Estate. I also want to take the opportunity to introduce other members of the board for the fire department. Have Joe Buckley, have Ed Heyman, and Tim Rhodes here. I think you all know.
So I think pretty much everybody here knows me, at least to some degree. I am a resident of Southern Shores. I've lived here for 5 years. So as part of my role, Fire Services Real Estate Company, which is the organization that actually holds the assets for the fire department, so the building, the land, the fire trucks. As part of that, I started working with Ed 2 years ago, maybe, to begin to think about the needs of the fire department and specifically a new station and, sort of how that would work for the fire department, but also the needs of the town. So today, my goal is to sort of help facilitate this meeting. I'm not a professional meeting facilitator. but I have facilitated a number of meetings in my business career. And my goal today is really to make sure that we sort of facilitate a two-way discussion, that you all have the chance to hear from us on some of the things that we want to tell you, but importantly, you can ask us questions. The goal coming out of this is that, you know, you have enough information to be able to make decisions moving forward. And as it relates to the building itself, we give you an update on where we are at in the process and, you know, sort of what the future looks like of that. But the other sort of important goal is that we get through it all. So as facilitator, I'm going to be sort of playing the cop role a little bit. I'm going to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak and dialogue back and forth, but also that we sort of stay on the track. We got to make sure we get through all the content. We have a sort of a limited period of time to do that. And I'll just be sort of, you know, raising my hand a little bit if we're spending too much time in one area or not moving ahead. So that's really my goal. The last piece is I'll be taking notes as we go. I know there'll be a lot of questions that maybe we won't be able to answer on the spot or things that we need to follow up on. I'll keep a list of all those things and we'll get back to that after the meeting with any follow-ups that are required. Do you guys need any time?
No, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just wanted to remind that this contract does come up effective, terminates June 30. Okay, the contract would terminate at the end of next fiscal year. And so I did want to emphasize that the fire department has been in discussions with town staff now and various committees, and of course has made reports to the council for approximately 3 years that we were going to get to this point where we needed to start discussions about renewal of the contract. So that's the purpose of this meeting. Pat does have an agenda that that is in your packet that he gave out, and he's going to pass a copy of it around as well. So I have included in your book some historical documents that led us to this point. In particular, you'll see, if you've read them, that the contract was negotiated 2008 and 2009. It immediately, in 2010, was adjusted. So the compensation was adjusted in 2010, and I can tell you the first day that I walked in the door and was sworn in as town manager, the council adopted a budget, 2010-11 budget, which contained the adjustment that we're at now. So as you've read, the compensation is computed based on tax rate, and of course that rate was transferred to revenue neutral in 2013 when the county reevaluated property. So that's how we arrive at compensation each year that we project for revenue income per the contract. And Ed, do you have anything?
I just have just a couple quick things. I just wanted to quickly I know they made their introductions, but I just wanted to quickly say Malin actually runs the North Carolina Aquarium, so if you weren't aware of that. Joe was worked for the phone company in New York and also did a lot of his own limo business or ran a business. Eddie Heyman is a retired police lieutenant from New York, and Tim is a long-line resident and is also with their county EMS for I don't know how many years, but he worked at other companies. So you can see a wide range of what we have. Basically controlling the fire department is made up of residents, long-time people, business people, all people that have pretty business-minded heads on their shoulders. So most of us are on the same page. I've met with each one of you individually as well as in a group at the station. So we're pretty much, I believe we're almost all on the same page. I think this meeting, Pat will do a good job of getting us all on an even playing field. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. So with that, I'm going to let Pat take over, and Malin will be our spokesman for today. So, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's time to just jump into the content at this point. So Malin's going to start by, you know, just going through some sort of what I would call background information. Stop along the way if you have questions, and let's get through sort of the initial few pages of this and see where we land.
All right, thank you, Pat. As was said before, we're near the end of the current contract. It was a 10-year contract. It's set to expire. It will be expired July 1, 2019, and we would like to start negotiation now for the renewed contract because you'll see how that impacts the plan for the fire station. The two are linked, and we'll show that later. And as stated before, our goal is to get a group together so that we can work out the details so that everybody's in agreement and we can start planning for the station as well. On the next page, I think that we can show that the volunteer system that is used by our fire department is very efficient and cost effective. We have a couple pages that I'll get to in a minute that will show a comparison with other towns. And I think when you look at that, you can see that there is a really good value here for the town of Southern Shores. Currently, the town pays for approximately 80% of the operational budget. The other 20% is borne by Dare County in covering Martins Point. So again, the town, I think, gets some benefit with that. You have a fully operational fire department that 20% of that is paid by the county. As we get to at the end of this contract period, we have one more year to go on that, and we will need to make a request for an additional $60,000 to that contract because of increased personnel cost. On the next page, there is a layout of income comparison, and it shows the town and county split. If you look at 2010, you can see what the town was paying, $473,000. And currently, the town's paying $481,000. So that's less than a 2% increase over that period, which is, we feel that that's been pretty responsible management here. Our costs certainly have exceeded 2%. And for that fact, they have. And so that bears the need for the request for additional $60,000 for the final year. When we bring that up, we also intend to, again, working with Dare County on Martins Point coverage, we want to maintain that approximate 80-20% coverage with the town, because that represents the services that we're providing. If you split the services, about 20% go to Martins Point, 80% for the town. So we feel that that's representative. Pat?
Yeah, so Ed has already started to have conversations with the Martins Point HOA, and I mean, you can comment on it, but I think they're in a position now to be able to agree to the increased rate to support the personnel costs, which I think you should, Ed, maybe comment on the personnel costs, just so that everybody understands exactly what we're talking about.
Sure. The personnel costs basically are due to the addition of the deputy chief, which should be no surprise to anybody here. I have the email that I sent to town back on September 21st to basically tell you that we were struggling with the officers at that point, and to maintain our leadership, we needed to add that deputy chief, and we did so. And I was actually kind of surprised no one asked me about it, but pleasantly surprised. But you could see under well management, they were pressing me, and I had to justify why we needed him. But if anybody has any questions, I'll certainly answer them. But I believe adding the deputy chief has added a lot to the department. He's there from 3 to 11, so from 7 to 3 when I'm working, and then 3 to 11, we have someone actually at the station, which opens up training for our members, which some people work different jobs. They can't be there specifically on training. So it gives them a different opportunity to be able to train with us. Any questions someone might have, a resident that's coming home from work is now accessible to the department where they didn't have that before because everybody left at 3. So it just opens it up and provides a little more access to the department. In the summertime, the doors are wide open. People can bring their kids or families, whatever they have questions, they can come there and discuss it with the deputy chief. And if he needs further advice, he can call me at home as always. I think that pretty much covers the deputy chief. Anything I would like to say about the homeowner association. Now, I have had a meeting with them. It was the same Tuesday. It was a council meeting actually left early that day. It was in January. I met with the HOA board, which I actually live there, so I did discuss them. I told them the additional deputy chief, the additional costs, the inflationary costs that we've overcome. And I have the support of the homeowners association. Now, that doesn't mean that we're getting the increase right away, because they're not responsible for giving me the increase. But certainly their support will go a long way with the commissioners asking them for the increase. Ultimately, it's the commissioners of their county that will give us the increase, not the homeowners association. However, their support is going to go a long way with the commissioners. With the comparisons I've drawn up with the inflationary costs, it's very nominal, just like it is for you people. I don't see it being a problem, but again, it's not a given, it's not a guarantee, so I have to ask the commissioners. Does anybody have any more questions for me when addressing those two topics? Mayor?
What's the deputy chief's name again?
Jay Williams. Jay Williams. He's lived in town, he's lived on the Outer Banks for, I'm sure, forever. Yeah, he's owned different businesses, again, real business-minded. And the reason why it was so important to keep someone like this, Jay Williams, like specifically, I interviewed many people, all the way from Pennsylvania, where I'm from, Northern Virginia, here on the Outer Banks. But the reason why I picked Jay, one, he was already a member, and he's a very good manager of people. To me, it's very important to maintain, and make no mistake, I know exactly what my job is, to keep the costs down and provide a good service, which is what we're doing. If you put the wrong person in as deputy chief, you'll push your volunteers out and your program's over. It's very important, it's a very integral piece to make sure that he can manage those volunteers and not push them out. And I think Jay was the right pick, as is, I think you can see, our membership's climbed 11 people in the last 2 months or 3 months. So, I mean, we're on the right track. I'm not guaranteeing it's gonna stay that way, but we're definitely going in the right direction, so we'll just keep pushing.
Glad you mentioned that.
Anything else?
Yeah, so the increase that's requested is essentially 100%
That's correct.
associated with that personnel cost.
Yes.
There's really no other increase that we're asking for at this point. Back to you.
Okay, thanks. On the next page, this is one that I think tells you a lot, and it compares what the town of Southern Shores is paying for its fire service with some of the other towns in the Outer Banks area. And I think that it's noteworthy to note that if you look at the column that says percent change over time, again, that's that less than 2% change I referred to. So we really, I think, have done due diligence in keeping our costs as low as we could. And also, if you look at the last column, the number of service calls that are done, this gives you a good indicator of the activity, the productivity, if you like, that the station is doing. And I just want to point out that if you just look at Kitty Hawk, who they do have more calls, but we're doing 80% of the calls that they're doing. But look at what the town of Kitty Hawk is paying for that coverage. That's, over 3 times as much as what the town's paying. So again, I emphasize that there's a really good value here that we've been able to deliver to the town. We take it seriously. And if you look at Duck, again, they're paying over $1 million annually for their fire service. And they don't do as many calls as we cover. So we're very proud of that.
Yeah, and of course, sort of one of the most important pieces when I look at this is just, particularly if you look at Duck and Collington, but also Kitty Hawk, is just how much it's increased in the last 5 or 10 years, largely because they've had to install full-time people, full-time staff to run the entire department because they lost their volunteer system. They just couldn't get enough volunteers to run the departments, so therefore pay for it. I know Ed's goal, he talks about it all the time, is to maintain the volunteer system. That's how you maintain a low cost. It's really critical for us. So we just put this down just to sort of help everybody understand that the value still is really here, and making some investments in the department, I think, are important to help us maintain that volunteer staff.
And related to that, if you go to the next page, we know that it's near the end of our contract period. It's natural to want to look at, are there any other better ways to operate before we go into a new renewed contract? And I thought this was very telling. If you look at this information here on the cost to run a small, all-paid, fully staffed fire department, you're looking at the bottom line there is over $1 million a year just for that. And you won't get as many people involved as you have currently. So it's something that I think it's natural to think about, but I think we can provide, again, better value to the town.
Malin, can you give a little more explanation of what you just said about the number of people involved? So what happens when you have a paid staff and there's a call? What happens when you have a volunteer staff and there's a call?
Well, I'll let Ed answer that one.
basically what happens is, right now, and I can tell you this weekend, we had 9 people training in Buxton all weekend, Saturday and Sunday. They left at 6 in the morning, didn't get back till 6 at night, and had to clean up afterwards. Saturday, we took a medical call, not too much happening. Sunday, however, was pretty much off the hook. We had 9 people training, we had 3 or 4 medical calls, we had a bad accident in Currituck we went to. 2 of them were flown to local area hospitals and possibly gonna be a fatality. And we also went, mutual aid to Kitty Hawk for a gas leak in a building. We sent 7, we had 9 training, sent 7 to Currituck, and we had 6 still at the station. I don't know anybody on the beach that can do that. I'm just being honest with you, and you can check it out for yourself. So our manpower issue with keeping the volunteer system is definitely a plus. I don't want to get into discussing what other departments do. I don't think that's right for me. I'm not sitting in their seat as chief. But I can tell you this, if you have an all paid staff, you're gonna have to depend on callbacks, and they're getting paid to come back. It's not like the volunteers where they're coming in and staffing in and waiting at the station. If you miss the truck, you don't even get, for lack of a better word, get to go do what you signed up to do. You have to sit at the station and wait, because I want someone covering the town. So I think we all need to keep in mind that the manpower we're putting on the ground is a significant thing to mention. These other departments, while they have the first engine covered, that's great, but what if it's not a room of contents? And for those of you who don't know, I'm saying a small fire in one room. You get the wax myrtles, you get the 7th Avenues, for those of you who remember that kind of stuff, any real bad car accidents. You need like 20 people, like right now. I know Gary was on the wax myrtle, I know Tom was up there. You don't do that with 4 people, that's not how it works. So you have to keep that in mind, the manpower we're putting on the ground. I think that's very, very important, and why I'm pushing to maintain the volunteer system, okay?
Thanks, Ed. Well, with respect to the renewed contract and the proposed new fire station, we know that the town is interested in a stronger reversionary clause. We're open to that. We feel that should be part of the discussions. The town has a lot invested in that, and we want the town to feel comfortable with that investment. We're also, instead of waiting at the end of a 10-year period and me coming forward and tell you how great a job we did, we also understand that we could put performance metrics in there, so that all along the way that you can see that we're doing what we should be doing. And we know that you may not be involved in a fire department, but there are comparative indexes that you can use to make sure that we're doing what we say that we're doing. So again, we can put that into the contract.
So these points and a few others are important relative to negotiating a new contract, but also relative to the decision to move forward with a new station or not. So there currently is language, a reversionary language in the contract. I think it's written in such a way that it's a little bit ambiguous for the town. For you as council members, you might ask, well, the way it's written today is if we were to dissolve for financial reasons, basically the assets would be split up and provided back to our customers, which includes the town of Southern Shores and Dare County. And it would be based on the split of pay, so roughly 20-80. So in that scenario, if it happened today, the building would be sold, or there'd be some way that the building would be, sort of the assets would be shared, and then Southern Shores would still have to figure out how do we manage, fire coverage. In the case of a new contract, especially associated with, a new building, we would want the language to be written in a way, especially if the town is the only one paying for it, to be written in such a way that the reversionary clause would send the building and the land back directly to the town, not be split up, because I don't think the county is going to be involved if there's a new station. So that point in particular is important to us. It's important to the town. It's also important to the fire department. So we, in terms of a contract, we want to get this small working group together, work through all these points, but not sign a new agreement until we get to the point where we determine, are we moving forward with a station or not? Because we would probably have a different opinion on some of these things if the town is supporting us with a new building than if they weren't. So reversionary clause is a good example. We're all for writing a much stronger reversionary clause if the people of the town of Southern Shores are willing to make a big investment in a building. So the working group that that is put together, we'll have to work through all these issues, and then come back with a proposal to the council and to the board of the fire department to sort of fine tune and agree on. But I wouldn't recommend that that contract gets signed until we get to the point where the building is determined and figured out. Because I think we would feel differently about some of the elements in it, building or not.
Okay, you mentioned land and building. There's no mention of the equipment, which you got to have a couple $1 million in equipment total. That would all be included in that package. It wouldn't just be the land and the building.
So the way, it's a good question. I think it's something that we're gonna have to think about. So today, the equipment is part of the reversionary clause as well.
Right.
And gets split 20/80. We know that if you move forward with a building and make an investment, and if the town makes 100% of that investment, that's different than the equipment, because currently the equipment is being funded 20/80 by the fees that you're paying, contractual fees that you're paying. So I think we have to just probably have a conversation with the county about, is the equipment different from the building?
But it would still, even if we didn't do anything, the equipment would be split 20/80.
Correct.
Between
Today.
the town.
Based on the agreement today.
I think the town manager can shed a little light here.
Yeah, obviously, the goal that I would recommend the council have is if the fire department were to dissolve, as is stated in the contract, something's got to happen with everything. Pencils, paper, everything. So that includes the equipment. So the anticipation would be that everything would revert to someone's ownership. Right now, I've never read the Martins Point contract. I have never seen that. So right now, I'm assuming, after conversations with the county manager, that the county really doesn't have anticipating that the county doesn't have an interest in receiving any equipment or title to anything. It would be Southern Shores to negotiate a reversionary clause in the new contract that would be suitable for both parties. And that would include everything upon dissolution of the fire department, if that were to ever happen.
I wouldn't think that the county would want to be a part of that, other than to continue to provide service from Martins Point and have it come from us.
Yeah, they've got options too.
Right.
They've got other options.
In talking with people at the county level, that's what Peter just stated is pretty much what I've heard, is they don't have they don't really want to get into it. They just want to provide the service.
That's my understanding also.
Which is great. That'll make negotiating an agreement easier, but you still have to get them to agree to it. You know,
But 80/20 is fair anyway. So.
Last point that I wanted to make, just about these performance metrics. So today, there really aren't performance metrics in the agreement. There are just, I think it's mainly dissolution as it relates to financial issues. And I think, personally as a taxpayer, and a business person my whole life, performance metrics is what I lived with. So I want to see something in the agreement that says, hey, the fire department has to live up to X, Y, and Z. And he's got some good ideas on what those kinds of things could be. That would just ensure we have enough volunteers.
Right.
We get to the calls, the things that are really basic that actually are not in the agreement today, but I think getting some of those things in the agreement might help people feel better about making investments and then making a long-term agreement with the fire department. And so we sort of brought that idea to the table. I just think it makes good sense.
Talk a little bit about our insurance rating, just so everybody understands that fully, if you would.
Well, today we have a insurance rating of 3, which is the best on the beach. Now, there are departments that are lower than us, but the majority of the departments are a 3. The MAG set, I believe, is the last person that's going to go through it. They're going through it in March, so they're all geared up, getting ready to go through it. I think for a small volunteer department, everybody down here, all the fire chiefs, were like, wow, something's going on up there. Because it's very difficult to obtain that. And I'm sure I went through this with, I don't know if you guys were on council when this happened, they probably were not, right? That was too long ago. But basically, it's like the IRS coming to your house and saying, I want to see every record you have for the past 5 years. Everything. I want to see it all. And if you don't have one T crossed and one I dotted, that's points deducted. Okay, so it's in addition to just the fire operations, it's your water supply in Dare County, it's your mutual aid agreements, which, you know, a lot of people are like, hey, why do you send vehicles to Kitty Hawk? Who cares? Well, because when it comes time, they send vehicles to us with personnel, you know, Waxmore, stuff like that. And in that agreement for the State Fire Marshal's Office, that counts some points for the ISO. So having all those agreements and contracts in place helps the residents and business owners to get a smaller insurance bill because we have a great rating. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, the level of work that these guys all put in, even the regular members put in, just the training. It counts for everything. Just one little bit, the guy's making an extra 3 hours of training, affects that rating. It could affect that rating. So I think it's very important. It goes back to adding Jay, the deputy chief, giving them more opportunities. So it all kind of, well, maybe you don't need to or you don't want to, or if you do want to, I'll explain it to you. But the big picture, every little piece, every little cog in the machine accounts to the final ISO. And that's not fair to say that's the only judge. I think that's an important judge. But I think anyone will tell you, this weekend, 2 of our guys got the awards they were training with all of Dare County. And it's 2 of our guys that brought the awards home because we're well trained and we know what we're doing. I think that's very important when it's your house on fire or it's your loved one on the ground that needs medical treatment. So I think it's just very important to keep in mind that ISO rating is a general overview of what kind of job we're doing. If we're at ISO 9, obviously that's a lot worse than if we're a 3, 1 being the best. Okay?
Impact on insurance rates?
Insurance rates, better rates. Obviously, the lower you go, the better rate for the insurance for business and residential. So if we slip to a 7 or 8, you're going to see that reflected in your homeowner's bill.
Is there a way to get that message out to the residents so they'll understand? You went from a 4 to a 3 this year, right?
Went from a 5 to a 3.
From a 5 to a
Yeah,
3.
From a 5 to a 3, and I believe it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago now.
It reflects in their bill, but you know, your insurance rates go up, but it also reflects a decrease that people don't realize.
Well, I think most
And
people...
that, I'm just saying that, you know, you're getting a better rate on this end if you pay a little more on this end.
I also think people need to understand that as much as I can talk and I come to the meetings and tell you stuff, and I feel like sometimes I'm kind of boring you, and I don't mean that, but I mean, sometimes I feel like the mundane, like we went to this call, people are like, hey, we don't care as long as you answer the call. But I realize it's part of the job. I just don't want to bore you with the details, but that's kind of my job to make sure this all happens and we're in play, and just as it's the chief's cool job to make sure they do a good job with the police. I think it's important to remember that everybody has to be engaged. Well, we'll put it on our social media. We give letters to the town for a newsletter, all kind of different outlets. If people don't want to read our web page or our Facebook page or something like that, there's not a whole lot I can do. I've offered at every meeting to have people come to the station, and some people have. They'll come and sit in the office and I'll explain different things to them, and that offer is always open to anybody if they want to come. But it's very
You got
difficult.
the news media right behind you. Maybe they could do an interest story.
So, I mean, as far as opening up the doors, I specifically, other than when it's cold out, I specifically keep the garage doors open for a reason. I want people to come in there and question me, ask me anything you want. I'm an open book. I mean, I'll talk all day about this stuff. It's what I like to talk about. So if anyone has any questions, I'm certainly willing to do it. But in my opinion, we're doing everything we can to put our message out there for our social media pages, through town, through the newspaper even. You know, we have different articles you'll see later on. But certainly if there's something else, if you have any suggestion, I'm all ears to listen to it. So.
Let me ask you this, Ed. Have you done any analysis with the insurance companies to see what the actual savings would be to the average homeowner in Southern Shores? I mean,
I have not.
that's a selling point to them. They understand how much they're actually saving. Means a lot more than a 3. They don't know what a 3
Yeah,
means.
they don't know. And it's nothing, no disrespect to them, but what do they care? They don't know unless it affects them, myself included, unless it affects your bottom line. You know, that's what you're really worried about, so.
Well, there's a lot of talk about costs for new building and equipment and so forth. I think everybody's very supportive of it, but they're very concerned about costs. And if you can show that, you know, you're saving it, like Gary said, on one end, but it's costing you over here, what's the net effect? People may understand a little better.
And one of the issues, Ed, is, to tag on to that, is, you know, you have fire insurance, and then you have flood, and you have wind and hail and all those other things, so you don't really look at it. I can tell you, I have a house in Kill Devil Hills. They went from a 4 to a 3, and that's the only change that I've seen overall, and everything else is going up. But the fire rate is $300 to $500 for that 1 point. So that's a real savings to the individual when these guys go down.
We'll take a look at it and see if we can.
But it's a substantial amount on the fire aspect. And, you know, your flood goes up, your wind goes up, so you really don't, and that's why I say it'd be good if we could get it out there for people, because, you know, everything's gone up. That part went down. So,
I think also it's important to
Good
remember,
point.
when
Unless
this
you're just
building comes up, the
analyzing
public to
what's-
understand. The building doesn't just, it's not just an investment for the town. It is an investment to keep this volunteer system,
Oh, sure.
us prepared. You cannot put a paid crew in that station. You've all been there, and I've bored you to death with the problems and everything that's going on there. If it would ever come to the point where we would say, listen, I'm sorry, can't hold my end of the law, we need to hire people. Okay, now you have 5, 10, who knows, $20 million station if you wait, I don't know, on top of the personnel costs. So you're, not only are you getting beat over the head for the building, you're getting crushed from the personnel. I think people need to look bigger picture than just, okay, this is what your monetary cost is. Okay, I think the monetary cost is very important, obviously. Nobody wants to spend money they don't have to. But the bigger picture to save long-term and keep our system in place for as long as we can is through the new building, to prepare the town and the fire department for future.
Okay, one quick,
Go ahead.
Well, I just had, and I know you and I have talked a little bit about this, but I think it's important that we kind of talk about it in general, that, you know, the 80-20 split that you mentioned with the county. I just want to make sure that at least an overture has been made to the county to say, listen, do we want to maintain that split in the construction of the new facility? Now, you may have already done that, and I think you have. But to say, like, would you be willing to continue this arrangement and put towards 20% of the dollars? And likely, Gary, you're right in that they're just gonna say, we have no interest, we'll have Kitty Hawk do the service. But it is one of those things we should cross off our list to see if they're willing to do that, because, you know, that could be $600,000 plus.
I think maybe the town manager can help.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm pretty sure we've already done that, I don't wanna beat it.
No, that's fine.
I'll let Peter speak.
Yeah, I mean, ongoing discussions, as Councilman McDonald just mentioned as well, with town staff, that's what we're getting.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that when we get down to the nitty-gritty of the finer points of the contract, we'll cover that for sure. Absolutely.
That's fine.
And the problem is, you're preaching to the choir. We all know what we need, and we realize cost, and the public, you know, it's a little different. There's people who don't understand. You're there when they need them. That's all they care about. And they don't realize and I know I've heard you probably 5, 6 times in the last year go through your spiel. And, you know, there's 30 or 40 people there. And then us and the fire chief and the fire department, and there's very few people that understand the need. And that's why I say the more public we can be, the more explanation we can get out there for people to understand. You know, we really have a good deal. And nobody else on this beach has that good deal. And for a little bit more, we can have a better deal.
Good point. So there's one of the pages in here, somewhere at the back, we can get to it in a minute, but there's a page in here that actually talks to what has occurred relative to educating the public. And it's tough, I mean, really.
It is.
It's sort of tough to get the message out. We've had public forums, we have another public forum coming up. The news media has been kind enough to write 3 or 4 articles. We've got 1,000 people on Facebook we're talking to all the time. But I think when you talk to the average person, how many people in?
About 3,000, just under
Yeah,
3,000.
so we have to be hitting a significant number of them. We must be hitting at least half of them. But when you sit down and have a conversation, most people still have a blank stare about what does it mean. So I say, you know, we want to continue to reach out in every way, but anybody who has an idea, throw it at us. We're open to anything.
I think if you can show cost savings like we were discussing a few minutes ago, that relates to their pocketbook. I think they can better understand that than anything. I
you
mean,
guys-
Ed made a good point, you know, you got volunteers, that's a lot cheaper than a paid fire staff, but they don't look at it that way. They look at the bottom line. What's it gonna cost me? And the
And they're highly trained.
biggest fear is, we don't want our taxes to go up, because there are a lot of fixed income people living in Southern Shores.
Yeah.
That's what I hear.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys are kind of, in some ways, like a referee. The police department's in the same situation. When you do your job, you're not noticed. You just do your job, you know, and so that's hard to say why that referee, why that person who say, you know, until you see it, until your house is on fire, like you said, Chief. So that community, I don't know how we get there, but any tools you can help give us to second what Fred said and what Gary said, third it, I think it's crucial.
I know you had a call yesterday because I heard it. And that's, you know, that's important. A lot of people, when they hear that, you know, I don't know what you went for yesterday, but usually I know you do.
I mean, like when I make the comments in the town, I know I've made them several times, and I try not to bore people with it. But just because people don't see us racing through town with the lights on, doesn't mean we're not doing things. You know, all weekend there was 9 guys killing themselves training out there. Literally, these kids are 19 and 20, come home and go to bed at 7. When does that happen? I mean, they're literally exhausted. There's a lot of things that go on. Calls that are dispatched that aren't priority calls that you just drive the traffic to. Patient assist that we do in Southern Shores. It's not just Southern Shores. The beach in general does a lot. It's because we have elderly residents here that don't have family in here. And that's unfortunately part of our call. That's what we do. So just because they don't see it, doesn't mean it's not going on.
I know.
But we got note taken. We're going to go back and see if we can get some information on what the insurance benefit is and try to put a number on it.
Good points. Thank you. Since the new building is kind of entwined with contract renewal, we wanted to give you an update on that, and so that and you'll have more information to follow. But we just wanted to tell you where we are right now. And based on your feedback, to date, we have reduced the overall finished square footage of the building, and also reduced it to 1 story. There was a hazard mitigation study that's been completed on the existing structure. And then there was some concern about the septic needs of the new building. I'm happy to say that what I think is kind of an elegant solution has come across. It's very cost effective. So the pieces are falling into place on this. And as was mentioned before, March the 6th, 2 big events. The architect, Kendall, will be down, and he'll be part of a public forum on that day. And also he'll be addressing the town council. He can answer any questions that you have on the building itself. But we want to give you an overview before we got that. Right now, we're in what's called the schematic design phase. Yeah, go ahead.
So 2 comments on the 6th. First is the public call for lack of a better word. Ken is going to be here with big drawings. He's going to do a little PowerPoint presentation. We've invited anybody and everybody to come and be with us, to hear more about it, get a sense of where the project is going. I know that it's been on the town publications. We've had it on Facebook. I'm sure it'll be in the newspaper soon. So we're sort of really hoping we get a good turnout. Anything that we can do to stir up turnout, that I would say let's make sure we do that. And then the second point is at the council meeting, we are going to be looking for, and Ken specifically is going to be looking for us to provide feedback on a few choices, sort of design choices. And the idea would be that you're going to have to go left or you're going to have to go right. And we have to make those choices now to keep moving down the design path. They're mostly sort of aesthetic things and build and finish things that, probably have some impact on cost, but also have an impact on the way the building will fit, look, in the position it's in. So we will be asking for you to sort of weigh in on that. so that the architect can continue on with his work after that meeting.
One other thing, could you present at these public meetings other alternatives? Because people keep asking about that. They feel like maybe they're being railroaded into a new building. And I'm talking from what I'm hearing from the public. And to do a complete sales job of what you're trying to do, you've got to show alternatives and show the pros and cons of each of those. Because the thought now is, we're going to get a new building. We don't want to pay for that. It's too expensive. What are other alternatives? And if you can show that the alternatives are not that good, that the new building is really the way to go, then make the case for it. But if you go with just new building and don't explain what other alternatives you considered, I mean,
We definitely
you're going to lose them.
We prepared all that, we shared that at the last public forum, and we'll do it again to make sure they can hear it over again. The options of rebuilding, the option of looking at North Dogwood, other pieces of property in town, all the various options that we looked at, we have that. So we'll bring that back up and add it to the public forum.
Okay, good.
Great. Well, as I said before, we're currently in the schematic design phase, and that will be ending soon, and then we go into design development, followed by preparation of construction documents, and then they'll be ready to go to bid. And so at each of these phases, we'll be reporting to you, so you'll know where we are.
Just one thing on the number. We're not going to give you a number today. There's no way to give a number on what this is going to cost until we bid it out. The construction industry, Chris, you probably know, it's super fluid right now. They're all really busy, which probably means costs are, higher than what you'd expect. Interest rates are changing. There's just a lot of dynamics right now. So we are going to give you an example in a minute. I just, before you do that, it's just a number, a fixed number to try to do some calculations on. It has nothing to do with the number of what we think it's going to be or what it will be. So we'll talk about that. I just was trying to share.
Yep.
Stop the, oh my God, is that what the good cost is? It's not the real number. It's just
That's a good point. Yes.
Even the hard number you're talking about here is the architect's educated guess of what it would cost to do this.
That's right.
Okay.
Based on the square footage and estimates and other projects he's doing, he's
Right.
going to give you an estimate.
Right.
What you want, what the real number is till you bid it out.
Right.
So,
Okay, then if you'll go to the next page, you'll see some of the.
So that-
I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to get it, and that, the quicker we get it out, and people are aware, don't think they are not, but, you hear both sides. We don't need it, we're doing just fine. We need it, no big deal, do it. So, and that's just public speaking. So we're looking at, basically, on top of what we're doing, this increase, to pay a loan over 25 or 20 years, we're looking at what, Peter? Do you have a guesstimate? of what-
The only guesstimate I have is I would propose that we budget what we said last year, debt service in the amount of around $276,000 is what our guesstimate's going to be
Per year?
per year.
Because right here, I'm looking at an annual payment of $363, $395, $316, I'm going by your chart.
Yeah, so
So what's 290 is what, 2 cent, Bonnie?
It's about, it's 130, so
2.4, 2.4.
290.
So we're looking close to 3 cent increase to pay off a
2.23.
I'm not looking at that. I'm looking
little
at,
bit between 2 and 3.
I'm not looking at that at all. I'm putting in $276,000, which we made last year without a tax increase.
But
So-
taking up that much of our budget.
That's taking up that much of our budget. That's not projecting a tax increase.
I'm not talking about tax increase, I'm talking
Oh,
about.
I thought you just said 3 cents. That's,
3 cent.
it accommodates for that amount in the budget, yes, but it's not calling for a tax increase
So it's going
right
to
now.
be 2 point something out of what we're doing now. So, or basically 200,
$276,000, whatever the rate is on that would be, is what it represents, is what we're proposing right now, based on just
So
last year.
If we give you 270, I guess 270 is what we're given right now. If we continue that, they're gonna need one of those amounts down there, which is greater.
Can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
That page is an example.
I know.
I don't know if it's going to be 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, or 10 million. So that number is important. The interest rate is really important. We know that number's moving around. And the term of the loan matters. So if you pick a 10-year term or a 25-year term, it makes a big difference in the amount of payment. So when we get to that page, we can talk about it now if you like, we can talk about the impacts. The purpose of that page was just to show the impact of those three variables and how much of a difference it can make. Our goal as we went through the process with the architect was to drive it down as far as we could. We'll have a chance to do that again before he finalizes all his choices. But the timing of what you see on this page, which I think is where your original comment started, Gary, was, how do we look relative to the budget for this year and ongoing? Peter, I'll ask you to comment here, but we've already budgeted the money to get us through the bid documents. So enough money to fund all the costs associated with getting through the bid documents. You've already funded that. Am I saying that correctly? Okay. So that's in the budget for this current fiscal year. It's pretty unlikely, in my opinion, that we would have a whole lot of the opportunity to start the construction process and have a whole lot of payments in this new fiscal year, maybe a few months of it at most. So you're really talking about, what is that, 2019, I guess?
1920.
Before you would see the long-term effect of whatever the payment amount is to the contract. That make sense?
I understand.
So if we had that amount in this budget, the 280, whatever the final number,
276.
It's in there this year.
then that's almost, it's a savings account for when that triggers the year after almost. It gives us a little bit of a buffer as a town.
That's correct. Council funded this current year funds to pay for right up through bidding, pay the fire department's architect to go take us through bidding. So again, I'm just projecting an amount unless we have any better information between now and the time you adopt your budget. That's the amount we would project. And if we don't spend it, if there's no debt service owed, fees, et cetera, up front, then yes, it would be sitting right there waiting to be used. And the council could decide what to do with it throughout the year if it's not used. But some of it would be used in the financing. Some of it, I don't know how much, like Pat just said.
I do think we will have more information when Ken comes on the 6th around the range of the number. I think we'll be closer.
I understand. I know all that. I guess my question is, you're asking for this amount when we're really giving you 700 and, what'd you say, 270? 74 is 11.
That's in addition to the,
We're really giving you, right now, if we increase to that, we're going to be giving you around $800,000 annually. And we're negotiating a contract. This is going to be during, I assume this is going to occur during the term of this contract.
Yeah.
That was my point. Do we need to look at close to what we're, and I know we don't know numbers. I understand that. But, if we had planned 10 years ago to put a fire station in place and put aside money, we'd be doing that. And that's not on anybody, but that's just long-term planning, which we have a tendency not to do. But
Gary, here's what I think, here's how we talked about approaching the contract and the additional cost of the debt service. So the contract has, sort of the business elements of it, the things that we want to have changed associated with the reversionary clause, the service points, those kinds of things. We get started on that, get that work agreed to. And then we can, once we get agreement on the building or not, we can then sign that contract and just make an amendment on whatever the cost is. In the end, you're right, whatever that number is gonna get added to the contract as a contractual payment. That's how we'll pay for the building. That's how we'll pay the note. But, you know, sort of in the absence of knowing what that number is yet, we thought, well, let's get the, sort of the elements of the contract negotiated and done, and then the final number get added in at the point when we know it.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, then, if you want to take a look at the site plan, you can see, give you some idea of where the design is headed. You can see South Dogwood is on the right, and Pintail comes across the top. The parking, I understand, off of Pintail would require a variance request. A significant feature on this site plan is the fact that we can roll the equipment through the bays rather than having to back them in. That makes a big deal. Right now, we've got one of the trucks is parked behind another truck, so if we got to get it out, we have to move a truck. It adds to the response time.
Well, you'll have more bays too, so you'll have a place to put the trucks you want to get out first in one of those 4 bays instead of one of 2 bays.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
I would just make a comment before we move on, Malin, that there's a lot of changes in the new station, if it in fact happens. There's a lot of changes that will make it more efficient for the fire department to operate, and looking long-term, prepare us should the day ever come. There's added bunk rooms for people to sleep. During hurricanes, these kids won't be sleeping on the hard concrete floor with the station flooding next to them, which we've all seen, I've showed you personally. The bays are more apt for the equipment. I can tell you on Saturday or Sunday when they went to that accident, they had to move a truck to get the truck that actually has the equipment to extricate people out from behind it. Now, to you and I, it might not seem like much, but if that was your child in that car, you'd want us to be there very, very quickly. And that minute might make the difference someday. I don't know. I wasn't at the accident, I stayed in town. But there's a lot of changes here. The equipment driving in the back, it will be necessary to have a variance for the parking along Pintail, for the shared property among the road department and the fire department. And it will pretty much operate as it does now. We'll share that property, they can store material there, they can use the gate, just like it does right now. It operates pretty seamlessly, it's just fine. But that variance will be required to actually build the building if it happens. There also will be, this picture doesn't reflect it, but I know the town manager, Wes, have all been involved in this process, have discussed the parking issue. If you look further down on my screen, it's to the left, that little island area there where you see the cars in the road department, that will also need to be slots, just like it is up at the station to account for the extra parking spaces, so.
Where are you coming up with your parking numbers? I mean, do you really need this amount of spots? Tell me a little bit about that. Are you just trying to follow rigidly, no, I'm not judging, are you trying to rigidly follow what's in the code, or zoning code, or are you actually saying these how many spots you need?
It rigidly following what's in the code, and if I could comment 1 second on that. When he talks about variance, it really would require a code change, an amendment to the code, not a variance. The 2 areas would be the setback from Pintail Trail right away, that would have to be changed, and then the number to allow parking, if we wanted to adhere strictly to the town code for government and G&I zoning for a property in that zone, it would require more parking spaces. So he's going to come in with a plan that would increase parking along Pintail Trail. If the council would like to change that, that's great. I mean, we're going to have to propose there be parking allowed in the right-of-way of that street anyway.
Yeah, I mean, because this, I guess I'd be curious from my standpoint. I looked at it and it's the first thing I saw. What I'd be curious is, what do you guys think is necessary? Not just for now, you think about the paid station. Think about folks coming in, because people backing out on Pintail is it's a bad move if you can avoid it. So if we have not only are we granting a variance, but it's not really the safest thing in the world. And you guys are all about safety here. And so if we need to work with, in my mind, if we need to work with the town code to get there, parallel spots might work just fine. They're longer, they're wider, but they also keep people in the direction of travel. They're not having to back into the street. That's fortunately the call would be close, but you don't want that call. So in my, you've got a lot of spots in the back, there's opportunities over, in the setback, if you have to use the setback, in the setback, to the south, which would be, near the drive aisles for the trucks. Even if you had to do something in those setbacks, it seems to me a preference. And, I don't know how anybody else feels about this, this is the first time I've seen it, but I would encourage you to, if we're gonna make a change to the town code anyways, just make it based on what you need for parking, instead of just trying to pack tons of parking in that's not safe.
One other, following that, just to highlight what Ed brought up already, the dark, I'll say asphalt-colored area in the picture takes the parking lot back to approximately where the wooden fence is at Public Works now. And recall that the boundary line between the two properties is to the right of that significantly. So in order to make this work currently, and we'll continue to have those discussions with the architect, Wes and I have, when he's been available for us to talk to tell him exactly what some of the things you've said, Councilman Nason, but to make it work like this, we would have to have cross easement or something for us to be able to use that parking, and Ed said the fire department has agreed to that, so our employees could still park in those parking spaces. What it takes away right now is the ability to stockpile dirt for us. So that's something that we're thinking about as we continue through this process. Right now, I think we can make it work, but it is going to be a consideration for Public Works because we're losing that area, and it's basically going to be the employees parking there during the daytime.
So parking is not just fire department, it's also Public
Correct.
Works. So
Yes.
that number that comes up needs to be a realistic number to incorporate both of them.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an added benefit of not having overkill with parking, which is it brings cost down. I mean, it's just cost that maybe we don't need. If it's variance anyways, then let's just fight that battle. And as you know, this is a really unique situation. Or so let's just tackle it individually.
But your responders need someplace to park. They're going to drive to that station to man that equipment. They have to have, you'll have 8, 10, 12 people coming probably in separate vehicles to a normal, if you will, event.
Yeah.
So you're looking at having at least a dozen places you're going to have or more.
Right.
And
There's
for,
a
and
dozen
for
on
training events, you could have as many as 50 people. So we have a classroom training setting that will hold up to 50 people, which will definitely get used. So that, we figure the spillover parking across the street gets
Exactly.
used for that.
Would that be a weekend training? Would those trainings take place when?
Thursday nights and,
I mean, usually they're Tuesday nights, but there's a
If
class
they're-
coming up in March that'll be 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, so it just depends on what class is running at the time.
So if it's a night or a weekend, you have the school across the street, which has overflow for you, and I'm sure, that's available.
That's what we currently use that at times now.
I'm just thinking, like, Chris made a good point, backing into a street is not a safe issue, even though Pentel is not very, it doesn't have heavy traffic. But you had a dozen parking spots back there. And now you said we were gonna lose place to put dirt. What do we stockpile dirt there for?
Would you use it any other place in town, field?
Well, dirt, gravel, whatever they have to, the materials they might have.
Right.
Sand.
And it's not unheard of to kind of tweak the zoning rules for specific things. I know the town of Duck in their village commercial district is very commonly says, we don't want all parking lots. We want people to get in their bikes, and so they'll adjust their rules. So this isn't something that's totally out of the mix.
What are those two little squares down to the bottom?
Dumpster.
I can't,
Dumpster.
One is what we call a training facility tower. One of our guys actually built that so you can teach bailout, in the house, something like that. And the other, I believe that is the propane tank.
okay.
We also store like a van back there, we pretend to put fires, stuff like that. It's just training costs.
I'm just wondering if we could move parking back in that section and come on that property line like you said.
You may still need loading zones on Pintail, but at least then they're going with the traffic, they're not backing out.
I think you guys are making a good point. I think an easy question to have Ken take a look at this and see what options.
Particularly for the public. I know your ADA access is on that side, so that,
Yeah, although you could just easily put it on the other side.
I know. it's
Take the
not-
parking out, move it that way, put the parking on the other side.
Well, that's true too. We'll give them, yeah,
We can make that code adjustment.
yep, I agree. I totally agree. You could do a whole drive out on that backside.
Yeah.
All right, so let's.
As you understand, we're willing to work.
Yeah, I
Sounds
mean,
good.
in the end,
I mean,
it's got to work for everybody. The building, the structure, the way it's laid out, it's got to work for everybody.
Pintail's gonna have to be redone.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Just on the sketches.
If you go to the next page, it'll give you what I think is a little more easier to understand how the building is progressing design-wise. And then these are artist perspectives. And then if you look at the next one, there's a more detailed floor plan of the interior of the building, show how the elements work together, provide training areas, equipment areas, maintenance areas. All of that's is being worked on by the architect.
And by the way, we're giving you guys, we got these early, so we figured we'd include them for today. The architect's bringing large versions of all these, and updated versions of all this. So on the March 6th meeting, you'll have all that to be able to ask questions, go through whatnot. But I thought having this a couple weeks in advance would be good. If anybody needs a bigger version of it, we can get that for you too.
And an example of some options can be found in the next 4 pages. You'll see 2 sets of proposed front and side elevations and rear. And one of the options is an all-brick exterior, or brick with concrete masonry units. And the other one uses a combination of brick or concrete masonry units and hardy plank or cementitious siding. These are the things that, the architect can bring forward, take a look at, see what the costs are, see what the advantages of each would be. And then the next one is a photograph of an existing building, and it was thrown in here just to give you a sense of the style. This is not what we're building, but you can see the look of it's very coastal style, I think. It fits in well with the Outer Banks. I think it's a beautiful building. I think it'll be something that the town can value.
Yeah, for anybody who's been down to the Kitty Hawk station, that station, Ken's company built that, and Ken Newell's company was the architect design for it. So I think you'll see sort of that type of a look, but we have now is the time to have input. If we don't like the way it looks, or we don't like the design or the style, or the materials being used, we have the chance to impact that all now before the design is finished and before it's We've asked them, obviously, to be practical on the cost as best you can, balancing that against materials that will hold up in our environment, as well as, low-maintenance materials. So that's why you're seeing what you're seeing in the design.
He'll be able to tell us things like whether hardy plank is going to hold up as well as, obviously not as well as the brick, but will it hold up
Yeah.
30 years or whatever.
And he can give you rough cost differences, even in the meeting. I think most of it he'll be able to tell you off the top of his head, so you can then make some of those choices and let him go on.
Yeah,
Should we wait to get into more of the details until he
I
comes
agree.
with that, or do you need input from us, or what are you looking for?
I think I would probably, maybe, if you guys want to take some time, look at it, maybe make your notes, if you want to send them to us, or have us, we'd be happy to take them and then have him address it when he's here.
I mean, I can give you 2 comments that
Yeah.
relate to cost, because I know that we're going back to cost all the
Yeah.
time.
Right, you better be.
And so just quick things to consider. Option 2, which has brick everywhere, I don't know whether he's thinking of. Brick is very difficult to source here locally and have installed. And I don't know where he's coming from, but you don't have a lot of masons. What?
Yes, Tony.
Gastonia, so it's not a problem there. And even Elizabeth City, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
So I'm not anti-brick as a material, but it's worth considering that the more you've got, the more those costs go up. So the option 2 has brick everywhere, which is gonna require tons of steel lintels, and that's a pain in the butt locally too, above every garage door. So that would be a significant cost savings.
Okay.
The other thing you could look at is the pitches are fairly low slope. And I can't tell what it is exactly, but it's fairly low, particularly the front section. If they get those pitches up to a 412, they have the ability to use asphalt shingles. That doesn't mean that we are going to use them, but we have the ability to value engineer that out. And add alternate and see what the costs are for one versus the other. Whereas if in this front section, if you've locked yourself in, maybe that's the plate height being higher, maybe that's a whole bunch of stuff, but that could be an easy savings.
Yeah,
Because metal roof's about 4 times the cost.
sure.
I mean, and there's very few local folks who do, well, there are a few, but they're expensive and they can charge what they want. I understand the longevity side of it, but that would be something we as a council could weigh if we could see what's the cost of one versus another. The other piece that to consider, and this is me saying this, not nobody else, but particularly that front section is so low slope that I think I understand why he's doing it. Let's say that. But I would also say that if to get the higher pitch, to get the option for asphalt shingles, if it means that we have to look at adjusting building heights to give him a little more height to do it, he's not looking for more floors. But that's a lot of money we can save. This is a really, like I said, a really unique project. I don't know if the council would support it, but give him an extra couple feet of height in order to be able to get a real roof pitch on this thing to be able to save $50,000 is fairly substantial. So that would be
Okay.
just some thoughts.
I got those two. We'll pass that to Ken, and we'll have him, when he comes, he's prepared to address those questions.
To me, the big one is the roof, is the brick. I see Williamsburg, I see Richmond, I see Charlotte, Chapel Hill with a lot of brick structures. I don't see that on the beach. I think they look out of place, frankly.
Yeah.
So I think we're better off to go back with some other material, whether it's cedar siding or hardy siding, hardy
Yeah.
plank or whatever.
They can do wainscoting and the white wainscoting.
Yeah.
That's fairly common. It's very efficient and very inexpensive.
Brick up to a point.
Brick up.
You're beside
Yeah.
the school,
Yep,
Which has brick.
which has brick.
yeah,
And
well, yeah, around the bottom.
And
We'll give
it's-
them, we're gonna, I'll tell you what, we'll take all this stuff back. I think these are good questions around the costs, and by the way, stuff that you have great experience with that we may not. And those challenges are good to bring back. We'll let him bring that back to us and
Okay.
show you the options.
Well, I want to give you input. That's
Yeah,
part of it, so you
definitely,
can.
And if you bring us an option, understand this, you've got 4 bays, 4 versus 3. When you look at fire stations out here, I think Kitty Hawk's 3, I think.
We did the work on that, Gary, we spent a lot of time on the number of bays, because we knew that had.
Because that's a cost saver if you cut down that,
Yeah,
just thinking, why do we need 4 bays versus 3 bays? Better be able to explain that, I'll just say that.
we can explain.
What's the thought behind it? That you just
Yeah,
tell us?
I'm gonna let him comment on the equipment. So they're asking the question, why, remember when we did the assessment? The question is, why 4 bays versus 3? Why not just go to 3 and save the cost?
Just the equipment alone, you've all been there, the trucks are all back, that's weather that's eating them up. We want to try and have all the equipment in one station. I'm just gonna be honest with you, Councilman, we've cut everything from an operations standpoint that we can possibly cut. I just don't see it. We can certainly cut more, but it's certainly not gonna be prepared, and it'll be outdated the day we move in. So I'm just trying to give you my best judgment
But
as
why?
fire chief moving forward.
Well, but you're gonna have to explain that.
Yep.
And I need to know why we're gonna be outdated the day we open the.
Well, I can give you one example. The program, because, I'm not a building guy like you, Chris, I don't know anything about this, but they kind of you've done this spoon feed people through the process to get them to where you need to be. And initially, when Ken gave me his program, I forget what he needs. Program needs assessment, he had me fill out, okay, what's your station, what do you currently do, all these different aspects of it, and it's a 3 or 4 or 5 page document. I sent it back to him. The end result was it called for a 15,211 square foot building. What we're proposing here is a 13,000 square foot building, 1 story, at your request to keep costs down. I can give you an example of one thing. We had originally had 4 bunk rooms preparing for the future, because you never know, you have 2 females, you have a bunch of different aspects when you hire people, if that comes to it. We cut them back to originally 2, and I spoke with the town manager, I spoke with Ken, I spoke with my board, spoke with you. That means if you had 3, 4 people on shift, which are required for an engine, if you had 1 female, she gets her own room. I'm not against her having her own room, because it's great for 3 guys to sleep in 1 room. It's just we have cut, and I can explain this all the way if you want, we can do a thing on that, but I do think we've looked through to make it the most cost-effective operationally that we can do. We've cut everything we can cut. What we're talking about here, I believe, is materials that we can save money on. Chris's, roof pitches, obviously, well above my understanding of any of this. I'm not an architect, I'm not a building, I do fire chief, that's my job. So this stuff is kind of beyond me, other than just telling operationally what we need to do.
Can I,
I mean, already you have trucks stacked in the bays right now. There's only 2, and we still have a truck stored at the other station.
So you got, how many trucks?
We have 4 big apparatus, a ladder, 2 engines, and what we call a rescue pumper, which is for accidents, vehicles, things like that. And the reason why we have all those trucks, I'm not gonna try this out, but it all goes back to the ISO and getting your flow rates for different things. That's all part of it. I think for me, I could do a week in trying to explain this all to people, but I'm not sure they're gonna care. They're just gonna get bored to
and
death.
I think there's actually maybe a more simple solution or answer. So before we even got started, we sat down and we did a needs assessment, which he mentioned. I was part of that process. And you spend a lot of time talking about what equipment you have, where it's stored today, how do you want to use it, how should you use it. And as it relates to the bays, we went through, outlined all the equipment, and actually we have drawings of where the equipment fits in the bays. And I think if we show you that drawing, you will see, that will answer your question. Because the goal was to get the equipment from outside inside, and then also make sure it's operationally efficient. So I think if we get a copy of that picture and share with you, I think picture will go, a long way to help answer that question.
Okay, so let me throw another part of it. Can you extend those bays and reduce the number? And I'm thinking about the parking as well in this process.
Yeah.
We got it out there, if we move it over here, kind of deal. I'm just trying to rearrange. And had 3 bays and maybe extend them to where you could stack. Would that work? I mean, I'm just.
Yeah, so.
And I don't need an
It's probably a
answer, I'm
question,
just thinking.
yeah, probably a question for the architect and
Right.
not us, because I don't know how that fits. But I do know we have a problem with length already of the building. So trying to turn the equipment in and come through the back, the length of the equipment and making the turn and then fitting inside. So I think if you make the building longer, unless you give up more space from Public Works, which I don't think is in the cards, I don't know that you can make the building any longer and fit it.
I bet you he's also running up against overall height too.
He is running up, he is running its height
And
issue.
that's something where we could at least have a discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that's the consideration and we make it, to Gary's point, we can talk about it. If we make it
Yeah.
5 feet bigger, all of a sudden we can fit another piece of equipment in, it does start to pay off. But I don't know, and I think, Pat, you're completely right. Let's see that layout, let's see what you've got. And I think, and then we can.
But the public's gonna ask the question Gary did, well, if Kitty Hawk has 3, why do we need 4? And if you say, well, it's for equipment, which I understand, well, how does Kitty Hawk do it? Do they stack them, or they need less equipment?
Yeah.
Because he's getting problems.
I mean, people ride around, they see this
Right.
stuff, and if they don't understand, you gotta explain to them.
Sure.
Great.
yeah,
No, I appreciate the comment.
It's
yeah.
it's a selling.
Absolutely, totally understand it, yep.
I think it's going to come down to what you mentioned, though, that the fire trucks and all need certain maneuverable space on the roads in order to turn those vehicles. It's going to probably come down to that. But I've got another question. I know that this is a schematic design and everything, but what are they going to do with all the storm drainage coming off this property? Or have they considered that, or?
That'll be in the site plan. I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm positive he will address.
I'm sorry, what?
You're right.
He will address it. I mean, he has to, that's part of.
Can't use permanent
charge.
pavement,
Yeah,
right, with that, with the loads he's dealing with.
yeah.
Also, I noticed that in this picture here, their parking is identical to what Councilman Nason was talking about, pulling off onto the street, backing up onto the street.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that critically or positively, I'm just noticed. And on a final thing that I wanted to mention is the materials, whether it be brick or hardy plank. I think we all should consider what is in the character of the town. Does it fit in with the ambiance of the town and everything, which, in my opinion, kind of pushes you toward the hardy plank, but there is the counter argument that right across the street there is brick. So, you know, I think these are just all things we need to kind of weigh.
I believe Kitty Hawk is Fort Base. I'm trying to find a picture of something, and I don't want to tell you something that's untrue, but I'm almost certain it's Fort Base.
I mean, I don't know. I
I'm
was
trying to
using
find
his
it
example.
real quick.
I've looked at Kitty Hawk Fire Department, but I can never get past the driveway. It's just such
It's
a
crazy.
massive driveway.
Well, the other thing that you gotta run up against is Kill Devil Hills every time, or they back in. I mean,
Yeah, we back in too.
you
now.
back in, they back in. Why can't you back in?
It's
Well, the
dangerous.
trucks don't back up. I've learned that over the years.
Have you ever backed one of those in?
I'm not arguing with you.
That would
I'm
be
just
my
saying,
response.
I've
It's
been on-
dangerous. I
I've been on
Yeah,
158
yeah.
many times when Kill Devil Hills shuts down. the
Sure,
road.
yeah, blocking 158.
everything.
So you can, yeah. Back to you.
All right.
Good comments, yeah.
On the next page, we've actually already discussed much of what's on the next page, and that's the financing. Currently, the rates are around 4%, but it does seem like they're going to be moving up. So we're interested in planning now. What we're proposing is that the fire department builds and owns the building. We've spoken about that. And then the town would pay through a contract payment covering the note that the fire department would pay to the mortgage company. One of the reasons we're proposing that is that our information is that we assume all the liability in that case. The town is separated from that. We currently are doing that. We feel that we can continue with that. And then on the next page.
Before we go there, I'd like to just talk about this a little bit, because I think this is a really important topic for us. So we've started to talk to lenders, sort of trying to explore what is out there, what options are there. And, you know, and Peter, you've had a few conversations with some folks too. We had, was it PNC was in here last year? And, you know, there are options in the way this thing gets financed, whether it be, you know, a bond through the town, or the way that we're proposing it, which is essentially the fire department owns the building, and the building is its own collateral. And those, as we get further down the path of deciding the route to go, we'll share all the pluses and minuses of each option. But I would just say that what we've learned so far from the lender that actually works with us already on the fire trucks is his answer for us is very simple. You decide on what the cost is, he funds it. It's 100% collateralized by the building and land itself. The town doesn't have to give a guarantee of any kind. And essentially, there's no involvement on the part of the town. It's literally, you make a contractual payment to the fire department pays the debt. We talked to him about things like prepayment and lack of, you know, eliminating prepayment penalties, and he's open to that. So I know some of you have mentioned, what if we, you know, what if we were to take a 10-year note and pay a huge payment every year? Well, if we took the longest possible period, say a 25-year note, but it had prepayment, you know, abilities, that would, in my opinion, would be the route to go. It gives you the most flexibility. If you don't want to make the extra payment, you don't have to make the payment. If you want to make it because you have the money, you make it. So there's a lot of flexibility in the way that that approach provides us. Just want to remind you of the liability issue as well.
which today, Ben, you might be able to weigh in here more, but it appears that the liability to the town is much lower with the structure that we have today, where fire department is contracted, it's sort of like an arm's length agreement, really more so than the town operating the fire department, which reduces, I think, not eliminate, probably reduces the risk. And by financing it the way we're talking about, I think sort of maintains that. I think when the fire department, if it's owned, operated, and paid for by the town, I think now it's no longer an arm's length agreement. You're sort of involved with the fire department. So that's something to think about. And, we'll go down this path, probably, we'll continue to talk to these lenders, but we're really not ready to have a sort of a real serious conversation with them until we get to the point where, yes, we're gonna move forward. So, we're probably a couple months away from the point where we finalize that. And of course, the council would be, involved in what that final decision is. But we see that as sort of the most flexible route at this point. Any comments or?
Just wanted to ensure the council that I've always presumed that we would be involved with the fire department when they did their due diligence and put it out for a proposal, bid, if you will, for the financing. So at that point, I would have discussions with the fire department as to what they certainly needed to put in there, in their proposal, to cover all the bases, so when it comes back, they can make the decision that y'all would have to make to match up to that amount. So.
All right, and then the next page goes to what Gary was referencing before. These are just multiple scenarios put together, put some numbers in here to give you some ballpark ideas. Nothing is final.
Yeah, we could have easily selected $1 million or $3 million or $5 million. I put this chart together, I put 5 in there. I kept that number constant, and you can see the difference in the annual payment with a 1% rate difference or a substantial change in the amortization period. And the only thing that this was designed to do is get us to think a little bit about what is the best option for us as we move forward. And I think my answer would be high level of flexibility is the best. And you can see the ranges in there anywhere from, just on a $5 million note, anywhere between $315 and almost $400,000. So I'm concerned about interest rates. They're moving. They've moved about 0.5 point over the last 4 or 5 months, and it seems likely that they're going to go up further. So, I would say from a time standpoint, the faster we get to this, the better off we are in terms of managing the interest rate.
And then on the next page, we just want to make sure that the public was aware of our needs. And so these are some examples of what we've been doing. And again, we're open to suggestions on ways to improve that public exposure. But we are looking forward to the March 6th meeting. I think that'll be an important meeting. You'll have the architect there who can answer questions a lot more detail than we can on the building design.
Just a question on this. You guys are probably more engaged with people in town that have questions. And I'm just wondering, is there a way for us, a small group of us, to address some of those individual people and their concerns one-on-one or in a very small group somehow? Just as a way to sort of, like, you probably have people come to you and say, hey, I'm worried about this, or I don't know why they're doing that, and maybe they're not going to come to a public meeting and stand up and raise their hand in front of 50 people, but maybe they might like to have a conversation about it. I would just say we're open to that if any of you have. Our goal is to be transparent, open, take ideas, try to incorporate all of the ideas into the best possible outcome. And I think if we could get some more people in town to come along with the idea or the concept, or answer their questions or get their input, I think we're better off. So I just say, any of you that know people that might be interested in having that dialogue, send them our way. We'll happily have it.
I think that a lot of the issues that we're talking about here are just, most people are totally unaware of a lot of this.
Yeah.
And I think Councilman Newberry is correct in that to most people, it just comes down to what's it going to cost and how's it going to affect our taxes. Now, those are tough decisions that we have to address up here one way or the other, but I think educating the public on the complexities of a lot of this, that's a hard row to hoe, so to speak.
Yeah, maybe to your point, they may not really care about all this stuff. All they care about is what's the number and does it impact me or not? But I would just say, again, in an effort to be open and transparent, we would be happy to talk to anybody. Try to convince them if we can, or share information.
Yeah, people ride by, and I guess Ed's done such a good job of keeping up the outside of the building. It looks fine to me.
Unfortunately, that's true.
I hear it all the
I
time.
will take the blame for that, because I cannot work in a mess, and it just dilapidated, I can't do that.
But see, they don't see that.
And I've made the offer many times, if they want to come to the building, I will take them through as I did each one of you, and show them what the problems are.
Effective immediately, we're going to stop cutting the grass.
And the other piece to that too, to your point, I mean, the doors, the apparatus bays, doors are open, right, to show that openness. But that's not really good for the equipment.
No, it absolutely.
And in
It
fact-
absolutely, the new building, I would hope to have glass doors on, as Kitty Hawk does, but I think it's more important for us to have the building open for people to come in than it is the equipment.
Well, but that's a good point you made, though, because we want to put the glass doors in, be able to protect the equipment. Otherwise, because we're putting the fourth bay here, we're talking about, well, that little investment in the glass doors, which is small, it's a small piece of the whole, it protects our investment in the equipment.
Do you have a listing, like in written format, of what's driving a new building, like the deficiencies or hiccups?
We do. Yeah, we do. When we did the sort of the needs assessment, we had an engineering review, we had electrical review, everything that needed to be done to sort of assess the current state of the building and what issues we were having, and we have all that. We've shared it too, and we're happy to share it again.
That comes back to what Fred said earlier about being able to quantify some of those costs contrary to building, or as opposed to building, a new building. I think if you're looking at the dollars, as I recall, that it's going to take to bring that department you have up to some level of habitability or some level of use, even though you wouldn't have 3 or 4 bays, you're still spending a lot of money. It'd be a couple $1 million.
That's how we arrived at this, that's how we got to where we're at.
Right. But I don't think a lot of people in our community understand that. And I don't think you'll ever get that to them, no matter how hard you try. I think it's going to come back to your efforts and our efforts to make the final decision what we think is best for our community. And the public's going to have to be aware of it, but they're not going to buy into it completely or not buy into it. They don't. I think it was said very well a minute ago. They're concerned whether it costs them money or not. As long as it doesn't cost them a whole lot of money, they're going to no problem. I've had no negative comments about the new fire station. I've had inquiries about it and questions.
Yeah.
And do we need it type thing, but I've never had anybody say, we don't need that.
Yeah.
We shouldn't do that. I've not heard that. Now, maybe other people have heard that, but I haven't heard that.
Can you show the impact in dollars if we don't do it? In other words, if you keep operating the way you are, and you currently have a 3 rating, that you're jeopardizing that rating, it could go to a 4 because we're deficient in our future operations. If you can show that impact, that would
That's where
help.
you're gonna be.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I'm guaranteeing you, that's where you're gonna be.
But I think the next piece
If
to
you
that.
walk in that station,
What do
I
you
can show
say?
you where the water's rolling in.
No, I understand, and
Parking.
it's not me you
No,
got
I'm
to
saying,
convince.
these people, I can't make them come to the station. As much as I invite them and I'm there all day, I love to talk to them.
Yeah, but
they
you
have
show
to
them
want to
numbers.
be engaged and come here, and I can show them where these kids are sleeping when the water's flooding the station. I mean, it's very, very simple. If they want to come to the station, I can show them, and I'm willing to do that.
And I think so I think they're asking maybe a slightly different question. So there's 2 points. One point is there's a cost to keeping the station. There's a sort of maintenance cost to keeping that station of new roof, upgraded electrical, and we've done that work. We have that. That was part of the assessment. We had an engineer come in. We did all that work.
The second part of it is providing an environment for the volunteers that is encouraging to them, that's inviting to them, that says, hey, we are going to invest in you because you're giving us your time.
You know, you can relate that to dollars.
It's $1 million a year.
Yeah.
But
It's $1 million a
That's
year.
what I mean.
Every year.
It's at least $1 million. Kitty Hawk's paying
but
$1.5
unfortunately-
million in salaries.
Unfortunately, they're not gonna come in and walk through like we did with you, Ed. And that's an issue, and you know it, and that's what we say. I've seen you at Boat Club, I've seen you here, I've seen you in public hearings saying all these things over and over and over and giving out little fire trucks, and he's done a good job of that. I don't wanna act like you've not put that out there. But the bottom line is, it goes back, I don't know, Jim or Fred once said it, comes down to dollars and cents for people, and they don't come in and sit down and say, well, this building was built by residential specs, and this building's got water coming through the front door, and those things, and the electrical and the air and the roof, everything's gonna need to be done. And that's a lot of cost also, so we know that. But that's unfortunate for us, but when time comes, we're gonna have to look at it and see what we can do.
I'm just spitballing right now, but I'm wondering, is it possible for the fire department to prepare some kind of video that documents a lot of this stuff that would be easier for the public to go to a website, you know, the town website and look at that, as opposed to going down, catching y'all during working hours and getting a tour of the station? You know, like, it was a very telling
So there's
video
a-
would be of water coming into
Yeah,
the
so there is
station.
some, there are some things you probably don't want to put in the
I don't know if we
video.
want that. That's what I was discussing at the time. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. They're just discussing at the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm very
Yeah.
cautious on where I'm walking here because we still have to operate right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there are very touchy subjects here. I'm very cautious of what I say. I mean, you guys have seen what I'm talking about.
What are there, OSHA problems, or,
There's a lot of problems.
I think ultimately it'll be helpful to get all this out in some kind of format that the public can understand and grasp onto.
I don't think any government agency's going to penalize you or fault you for trying to do better. So I would bring it up. People need to know, you gotta make a case.
Well, it depends on what it is.
Look, guys,
I don't know
having
what
been
you're
involved in
doing.
this
I don't
whole
know.
thing, the case is clear. We made the case. People don't care about the case. You've said it yourself, and I think it's true. I think people don't care. They really don't. All they should care is, are you going to show up when I need you?
Right.
What's the cost?
Yep.
Because we can create video, we've created the PowerPoint slides, we've had the open forums, we've done the Facebook, we've done the article. Nobody cares. Nobody comes to the meetings because they're interested in other things in their life, and I understand that. This level of detail is more than they want. And I don't think, for somebody who's opposed to spending $2 million, $3 million, $5 million, I don't think it will make a difference. They're opposed, they're opposed. Giving them a video, I don't think is going to change their mind. The only way you're going to change their mind, maybe, is if you have a one-on-one conversation and say, let me sit down and show you why. And we don't have enough time to have 3,000 one-on-one conversations. So I think we continue to communicate, we continue to be open, we continue to share, we continue to invite people into meetings, and we'll do everything we can to sort of get them to understand it. But ultimately, they make their own choice. And you guys will have to make a choice based on, what impact you see and what feedback you get from taxpayers.
Can I make a suggestion to piggyback on what you said, Ed, and what Fred said? In thinking about this, one of the big savings that you can identify really clearly, and you've already done it in the chart that you've got, is what is the cost of a paid fire department? Okay, then you also have, I know, I can't tell you what the number is, but you've got a number of, I think, honestly, it's like 180, whatever it would be to rehab the existing. So that's got to happen anyways. So if you start to look at these potential costs, right, and the potential savings, and you put them together and you say, okay, we've got essentially, let's say the $3 million station, you've got about a 6-year payback, because you're going to save about $500,000 a year off the top for a paid department. So you can say, if we can somehow keep this volunteer situation going for 6 years, we break even on the station. I mean, that's the type of stuff. And then when you put in, now you're gonna put in the fact that, well, if we didn't do it, right, now you've gotta put 180 into the station, or whatever that number is. And you gotta do all this other stuff. So it's the next step beyond that chart. You've done a good job proving, okay, here's what a paid station, Duck's a great example. It's a perfect example, because it's about the same size. But anyways, that would be my point, and that might get to your point, which is what is the cost of not doing it? And to a certain extent, we as council members will be taking a risk. The risk is, can you keep it going for 6 years as a volunteer, and anything beyond that's just bonus.
We can definitely do that. I mean, that's a 15-minute exercise to do that, because we have.
You know what I'm talking about.
We have the facts, yeah.
You have
And
all the
it-
information.
And it's easy to make it visible and easy for people to understand, and we'll add that to our information.
To me, the strongest selling point we have is the fact that the cost of our volunteer department, as opposed to the cost of a paid department, forget about the building. Just talk about those two things. And as Chris just pointed out, if we only get 5 or 6 years out of our volunteers, we've practically paid for the damn building. Even if we haven't paid for it, we're most of the way there. And so I think if a new building at $4.5 million, or whatever the number happens to be, incentivizes our existing firemen to stay with us and work with us and look for new recruits to come on board, that, you can't put a dollar value on that. It's something you can't measure, but I guarantee you that we're, like I said, like Chris said, 5 or 6 or 7 years of a paid station, of a volunteer station, and we paid for the building, or so close to it, it won't matter. It'll be a
And the
question
add-on
of
to that,
tax
Tom, is
increase.
if in 5 years we were forced to go to a paid station, we would have to build a new building anyway.
That's the whole point.
That's a key point.
That's the key
I was
point,
hoping
because
that somebody would
people don't
recognize that.
understand what we're discussing here, and they don't want to understand it. You know, they look at dollars and cents, but the key point is, okay, we've got a volunteer, we're trying to upgrade, and that's what we need to do. If we go to paid, we still got to upgrade. There's no ands, ifs, or buts.
Yep.
You got to upgrade one way or the other,
Good job, council, we figured it out.
Yeah,
and we got to figure out how to do it.
Putting it out 5 years doesn't really change the fact that you're only spending good money after bad in some cases.
Right.
And it gets, interest rates go up,
Yep. Project increases.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
right now.
True.
And thank you guys for.
Thank you for your comments, too.
I have one final question. On March 6th, is it, when the architect will be coming in with plans? What are those plans? Are they construction drawings, or? So they're just a refined version of the schematics?
Schematic design, yes.
And he'll be
But
able-
that's what they would prepare the construction drawings on?
Well, that starts the process, then you go into what they call design development. That's where they start filling in all the little pieces into that.
Yeah, I'm kind of
Okay.
familiar with that.
But the construction documents follow that.
Okay, so what they're doing is bringing up like just a plan, this is what we're going to base our design development drawings on.
And
Yes.
he's going to ask for sort of feedback on some choices, some of the things we talked about today that we'll get to
Yes.
him, and maybe materials and things like that, and then he'll go forward and move to the next set of documents from there, more detail.
I guess I'm handicapped because I keep looking for more detail that's just not yet
It's
available.
not there yet. They're working on it, though, I know they
Yeah.
are, but I think you'll see a little bit more on the 6th, and then I think it's 30 days after that you start to see. I mean, you guys know how this is done, it's all done in
Yeah.
CAD drawings and stuff, so probably half of that detail is probably there. He's just not giving it to you yet, because he wants answers on the high-level questions first.
Yeah.
Next steps.
Next steps, the way we see it, is if you're in agreement that we form a small committee to work out the details for the renewed contract, and come back to you with what that committee generates.
I'd like to make that motion. Is it possible to use?
Can I explain some?
Sure.
things? If the committee is not comprised from the town's perspective of only staff, then if you appoint more than one person as a town representative, then it becomes subject to the open meetings law. And you'd have to have notice every time they met, and you'd have to have open meetings, you'd have to have somebody to carry them in, and that may be what you want. However, if you only appoint 2 people, then they can never talk to each other about it without having an open meetings or notice. So you either appoint 1, or you may want to appoint 5, so that you can have people who have, because if you have 3, then 2 people can never talk outside of an open meetings concept either, because that will be a majority of that committee. So these are concepts that you, if you want it all open, that's easy. If you want to have some flexibility about negotiations that aren't, and discussions that either for efficiency don't require an open meeting, or for their negotiations. Sometimes you want 2 people on one side to be able to say, well, we don't really want to do that, and this is why. And the other side to be able to do the same thing. And the other issue here is, of course, there's balance. They as a body, the fire department doesn't have that restriction. Their folks can meet, they can meet everybody, they can meet their whole fire department, they can meet their whole board, they can meet the chief and any individual and have those discussions. But as the town side of it, you have some limitations on that. So it's just important to know that those limitations are there. You can decide how to go either way you want to, but that's where the limitations fall.
Well, I would certainly want to hear what other folks in the room have to say, but I would be for them being public meetings.
And what happened in the last round of discussions on the contract, which were completely different concept of how the parties were getting along. I guess Bonnie was here. Bonnie and I may be the only ones who were actually involved in that. Were you here, Peter?
No.
Okay, so it was a little bit different world.
I don't think anybody wants to go back.
No, it was unenjoyable for everybody. But but either way, the concept there was that the fire department, picked people that they wanted to meet to discuss, and like I said, you can pick as many as you want, and it doesn't really matter. And then the town had a separate committee of 1 person who was the advisor to the council. And what that person did was they went and they would have, go to the meetings, listen to the negotiations, and they would use staff for support, but not as part of their committee. The only person who had any advising authority or decision-making authority was that 1 person. And their authority was to come back and advise council as to whether or not they thought the contract was at a position to accept it or not. They did not have the authority to actually accept it. So I think I would advise you to continue with that concept, that it all comes back to council to ultimately approve. But that's how it was in the past. That allows for, if you want it to be open, you can have it open, but if you didn't want it to be open, you could close it. But that may not, again, that may not be how you wanted it, but that's how it was done the last time.
If we have 1 council member, and then as many as you guys want to have, 2 or 3, each side, each participant, each entity has its own attorney there as part of that process for this working group. The council representative, 1 or 2, one I'm thinking it makes more sense just from the standpoint of being unwieldy, comes back to council after each meeting and reports back to council what took place in a public venue.
And I think the other concept too is that you could fall into the open meetings concept by appointing 1 council member and 2 fire department members to a committee of the town. So I think what you want to do is have 2 separate committees. You decide on whoever you want to meet, and the town decides on whoever y'all want to meet, and that they have meetings and they make decisions about the contract. I think a joint committee is going to be an open committee of the town that may be more complicated than you expected.
You're confusing me. You talk about a committee or a working group, same thing?
I think I would call it a committee a committee or an advisor of the town, and would meet with a select committee that the fire department selects of their individuals, and they would negotiate the contract, and then both sides would go back to their entities and say, this is what we got. And if it's right, then it's right. If it's not, then they send them back and they talk some more.
Okay.
What do we have in terms of confidentiality? I mean, this is what we, as a board, have a legal, this is a legal contract. And do we have the ability to meet in closed session to discuss the terms? There may be terms that we don't want during the negotiations to be public. Afterwards, that's fine.
If you appoint a committee, you will have, that committee would have the ability as a committee to meet in the closed session to, and that's another reason why you don't want both sides on the committee, because then everybody gets to go to the closed session. It just doesn't, it doesn't make much sense.
contract
Right,
negotiations.
right,
No.
it isn't. So,
Well,
but you would have
let's-
that
let's-
ability, but you would have limitations on that, because there are some things you can talk about in closed session, some things you can't. But if you appoint one person to be the advisor to the council, and let that person make the advisory decisions on what they're gonna advise the council to do, then that person can meet with me anytime, they can meet with Peter and Bonnie anytime, they can meet with these folks anytime, they can open the meeting or close, last time, rest in peace, Mr. Midget came to the meeting and, we told him it was closed and he said, I'm not leaving. So the choice was, okay, you can watch. It was easier than having anyone asked to leave more formally. But that's where you get the flexibility. If you appoint two people from the two people who are not both employees of the town, and that doesn't include officers of this board. If one of y'all are on there, if you appoint two, then it is a committee, and anytime the two of them met, it would be a quorum. So you would have to follow all the things, and for them to discuss anything confidential, they'd have to go into closed session, and they'd have to have a valid reason to do so.
So what's your pleasure?
Can I make a comment here?
Go ahead.
Just from my own personal experience, negotiating contract with 5 people on each side never works. So getting to a small group of people who can discuss the finer elements of the contract and then bring them back to their sides to discuss, do we agree with that or not, is the way to go. I think being open with the public, more so than closed, is better. The more openness you have and allow people to come is better. It sort of just makes the whole thing feel more like they're involved. So I don't know how you feel about it, but I would say definitely the sort of one-on-one is better, and then more open versus closed is better.
And I think what I'm getting at is only, you can always, if you appoint one advisor, you can always open whatever you want. But if you appoint two, it's always going to be open if those two people are meeting. You're under a requirement.
Jim, back to your point, how do you feel about that? I mean, you said open.
Well, I understand that sometimes things may need to be in closed session. But I think we've been talking about, the public doesn't understand a lot of what's going on here. It'd be kind of silly, in my view, to go ahead and have everything in closed session. But, I mean, I'm kind of looking for guidance from other council members here because.
Well, just let me say this, we're not having everything in closed session. What we're doing is having one person, the council,
Yes.
represent the council, the town, at a meeting, a group meeting, working group meeting with the fire department.
I think that's great.
And take
How
that
about-
information and come back to council with it.
How about this, Tom? And I can make it as a motion, but I won't. But how about we just appoint Peter to be the lead on this, since he's going to be negotiating with them most of the time anyway, and let him be the lead for the town.
He's got a legal background.
I'm just saying that way, I mean,
Let him really address that.
And also, following with that, if that's what you want to do, we'd be glad to advertise appropriate times when we meet to the public, and we've done that in the past. And there may be an appropriate time when we don't advertise, and we want the 2 attorneys in here, et cetera, but we can advertise a meeting.
well, and he's got the background, plus he's going to be negotiating the contract anyway and telling us and giving us advice on what to do anyway, so let's put him on point. I'm good with that.
That's a good idea.
Then he can come back to our council meetings and report
And
on
report,
it.
yeah.
And maybe some of it's in public, and then in terms of, if there are contractual things, that part
He
maybe
does that anyway, so
specifically.
you're getting that feedback. Are you agreeable? Are you amenable?
Fine. That's fine. I would ask the council to, if you want to do that, I would ask the council to make a decision today with that motion as to whether to include negotiations, finance negotiations on a new fire station in this scope of this or not. I think that's one thing that they need to take away, and I would need to take away. Do we include that or not? And I would
Yes.
recommend we do.
Yes. My motion would be to appoint Peter to take the lead and negotiate with a new contract with the fire department, including design and construction of the new fire station. Financing.
And to come back to council with.
And to come back to council with the information
And recommendations.
and recommendations.
On both cases.
I would like to ask if we can include in that motion that Peter works with the working group being formed by the fire department. I mean, I'm not nitpicking, I don't mean to be hostile or anything, but you made a good motion, but it didn't say what he was working, you know, he didn't say who he was working with.
Well, I can't appoint their people.
And I would just say that with whatever
With
representative.
with whatever representatives that the fire station chooses, or the fire station board chooses.
Right.
To work with him. I'm sure it's going to include the chief and some of those guys.
True.
Do I have a second to Gary's motion?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion, council?
Good.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion's made and carried to have Peter work as our representative to the working group with the fire department.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Good.
Appreciate the time, thank you very much.
Council, I would recommend that we break now for, until about 1 o'clock. Come back with a planning session after 1 o'clock, at 1 o'clock.
For a recess
I need a motion for a recess.
Motion made?
till 1.
I'll second.
God, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion's made and carried to go into a 2-hour recess. 1 o'clock.